Think harems were luxurious palaces filled with silk, perfume, and romance. Think again. Behind the carved doors and velvet curtains, the real harem was a prison of power, obsession, and rituals so disturbing they've been erased from most history books. Eunuchs who controlled every breath you took. Ritual baths that stripped you bare, not just of dirt, but of dignity. Tests of purity that were as cruel as they were degrading. And punishments, so creative in their cruelty they'd make medieval torture chambers look merciful. This isn't the fantasy of a sultan's paradise. This is the nightmare that unfolded in secret. From the outside, a royal harem looked like paradise. Endless courtyards, walls glittering with tiles, silk cushions spilling over golden couches. But behind those gates, it was less a dream, and more a prison with better furniture. The women inside were not free, not in the slightest. Every new concubine was stripped of her old life the moment she arrived. Clothes taken, name changed, freedom gone. She was given a new identity chosen by palace officials, one that erased her past and tied her entirely to the sultan's will. But wait, it gets worse. Guarding this hidden world were eunuchs, men mutilated so violently that it was meant to erase both desire and rebellion. They weren't protectors, they were jailers. Their loyalty wasn't to the women, it was to the sultan alone. And their orders were clear: control everything. Every move was monitored, every word could be overheard. You could be punished for smiling at the wrong person, for looking up when you should look down, even for humming a song the sultan disliked. The gardens, walled so high that no eye from the outside could ever see in, and no one inside could glimpse the freedom beyond. Here's the sickest twist. The comfort was part of the control. The jeweled hairpins, the gold-embroidered slippers, the sweet-smelling perfumes, they were gifts designed to keep you compliant, to make you believe you were lucky to be here. But the same hand that handed you a diamond bracelet could, the next day, sign the order for your execution. And yes, women vanished. Not in the middle of the night, but in broad daylight, plucked from the courtyard and never seen again. Sometimes it was for defying a rule. Sometimes it was simply because they'd fallen out of favor. In the harem, love was a performance, and you could be replaced at any time. It was a gilded stage for a deadly game. Alliances mattered more than beauty. Whispers carried more power than jewels. And those who didn't learn the rules quickly enough didn't last. But wait, there was one ritual that marked the start of every concubine's life here. A ritual as beautiful as it was humiliating. One that would strip away whatever scraps of dignity you'd managed to hold on to and decide, before you even met the sultan, whether you were destined for favor or for failure. It looked like a luxury, but it was really an inspection. The first thing every new concubine faced wasn't a warm welcome. It was a bath. Not the kind you might imagine, with privacy, comfort, or relaxation. No, this was a public ritual, a silent judgment disguised as cleanliness. They led the new woman into a steamy chamber, walls dripping with condensation, the air heavy with rosewater and oil. Marble basins overflowed with hot water. Attendants, older women of the harem, surrounded her, their faces unreadable, eyes scanning her from head to toe. But wait, it gets worse. This wasn't just to wash away the dust of the journey. It was to strip away the last traces of her former life. Clothes burned, hair combed until strands came out in clumps. Every inch of her skin examined, touched, turned over, not for kindness, but for value. Was her skin flawless? Were her teeth straight? Did she have scars, birthmarks? Any sign of illness? A single blemish could decide her fate. And here's the sickest twist. The bath wasn't only about beauty. It was about ownership. Oils were rubbed into her skin so she would belong to the palace. Her scent altered to match the harem's blend, a mix of amber, jasmine, and musk. From that moment on, even the way she smelled told the world she was the sultan's property. The attendants whispered to one another as they worked, trading comments in a code the newcomer couldn't understand. Sometimes they laughed quietly, and the laughter was worse than the silence. A giggle could mean your body passed their test, or it could mean they'd already decided you'd never see the inside of the sultan's chambers. The stench? So unbearable for some newcomers wasn't the perfumed oils, it was the fear. The realization that the water wasn't cleansing her. It was erasing her. Once the bath was done, her hair was braided in the harem style, a crown for those who might rise, a shackle for those who wouldn't. A thin silk robe was draped over her shoulders, and she was led to a mirrored wall. For many, it was the first time seeing themselves as the harem saw them, stripped, altered, and repackaged like an object for display. And yes, not every woman made it past this stage. Some were quietly reassigned to servant duties before they ever saw the Sultan. Others disappeared entirely, their names never recorded, as if they'd never existed. But wait, the bath was only the beginning. Passing it didn't mean you were safe. It meant you'd just earned the right to face the next ordeal, a ritual of whispers, shadows, and dangerous smiles. One that would test not just your beauty, but your ability to survive in the harem's most cutthroat arena, the midnight ceremonies. By day, the harem was silent. By night, it came alive, and the games began. The midnight ceremonies weren't announced. They were summoned. A whisper in the corridor, a shadow at your door, a eunuch appearing silently with a single candle in his hand. If the candle was for you, you had minutes to prepare. The other women would watch as you were led away, their faces unreadable masks. Behind their stillness was the truth. Every ceremony was a competition, and every winner meant another woman's loss. But wait, it gets worse. These ceremonies weren't always for the Sultan. Sometimes they were tests arranged by the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, to see which concubines were worthy of attention. She ruled the harem with an iron will, and could make or break a woman's fate with a single gesture. The chosen women were led into a vast chamber, lit only by hundreds of oil lamps. The light flickered across golden walls and mirrored panels, making the space feel endless. Musicians played quietly in the shadows, their notes curling through the air like smoke. And here's the sickest twist. Every move you made was judged the way you walked, the way you held your hands, the way you smiled. The Valide Sultan watched for signs of fear or arrogance, for any flaw she could use against you. The stench, so unbearable for some, wasn't from sweat or fear. It was the thick perfume cloud that filled the room, clinging to your skin and your lungs, making it hard to breathe. The longer you stayed, the more dizzy you became. And dizziness meant mistakes. Some ceremonies ended in a gift, a gold bracelet, a promise of introduction to the Sultan. Others ended with a quiet nod from the Valide Sultan, and the unlucky woman was escorted away, never to return to the main halls. Everyone knew what that meant. And yes, alliances could be made or broken in a single night. A glance could spark a friendship that might save your life, or a rivalry that would end it. But wait, the midnight ceremonies were only the warm-up. The most dangerous ritual in the harem wasn't a gathering of many, it was an audience of one. The moment you were called to share the Sultan's private chambers for the first time, that's when the real danger began. It was the moment every concubine both feared and dreamed of the summons to the Sultan's private chambers. To be chosen was supposed to mean victory. In reality, it was a night that could elevate you to untouchable power, or leave you broken, forgotten, and discarded by morning. The call always came without warning. A eunuch would appear at your door, his eyes never meeting yours, and say only 3 words: "The Sultan waits." There was no time to think, only to obey. Attendants descended instantly, pulling you into a whirlwind of silks, jewels, and scented oils. Every movement was rushed not to pamper you, but to present you like an offering. But wait, it gets worse. Before you could step foot in the Sultan's quarters, you underwent one last inspection. Hair combed so hard your scalp burned. Kohl applied until your eyes stung and watered. Even the way you breathed was corrected. You were taught to inhale softly, as if you weren't allowed to disturb the air around him. And here's the sickest twist. This wasn't romance. This was performance under surveillance. Behind the carved screens, the Valide Sultan's spies watched every moment. Every word you spoke, every movement you made, every flicker of hesitation, all of it reported back before dawn. The chambers themselves were an assault on the senses. Incense so thick it made your head spin. carpets so deep your feet sank into them like quicksand. The Sultan reclining on a raised dais, surrounded by cushions, his face unreadable in the flicker of candlelight. The stench, so unbearable for some, wasn't from him, it was the pressure, the weight of centuries of expectation pressing down on your shoulders, knowing that failure here didn't just mean losing favor, it could mean losing your life. And, yes, the Sultan tested more than beauty. He tested loyalty. Stories were whispered among the women of questions designed to trick you into revealing your alliances. A wrong answer could doom you before the night was over. Sometimes the night ended with jewels draped over your wrists, the promise of a higher rank, and the quiet envy of every other woman in the harem. Other times, the eunuchs arrived before dawn to escort you away. If you were lucky, you were sent back to your chambers in silence. If not, you were never seen in the harem again. But wait. The first night was only the most visible danger. The real horrors were hidden in rituals. The Sultan never saw private punishments, secret trials, and acts so cruel they were carried out in the harem's deepest, darkest corridors. And those were never meant to leave its walls. Think the Sultan's first night was the peak of danger. Not even close. What happened behind the gilded screens was nothing compared to the horrors hidden deep inside the harem's forbidden corridors. Down there, beauty didn't save you. Power didn't protect you. The wrong whisper, the wrong glance, even the wrong heartbeat could send you plunging into a world where light never reached and mercy never entered. These weren't punishments written in any book. These were secrets buried in stone, designed to crush the body, break the spirit, and make sure no one ever dared to defy the harem's invisible rulers. Every harem had its paradise above and its dungeon below, a place whispered about in fear, where the sunlight never reached and the air felt heavy enough to choke you. Officially, it was called the Quiet Wing. Unofficially, it was the punishment chambers. Women didn't go there for days or weeks, they went there to vanish. The summons was never loud, a hand on your shoulder, a quiet nod, a eunuch leading you down narrow steps that seemed to spiral forever. No chains, no shouting, just that suffocating silence that told you the worst was yet to come. But wait, it gets worse. You didn't need to be guilty to end up here. In the harem, guilt was whatever the Valide Sultan or the chief eunuch decided it was. A jealous rival's whisper, a misinterpreted glance, even laughing at the wrong moment could seal your fate. And once those doors closed behind you, there were no appeals. The punishments were crafted for precision, not speed. Kneeling for hours on ice-cold marble until your legs turned to stone. Days in a pitch-black cell, with nothing but the sound of dripping water to make you question your sanity. Bread so stale it cut your mouth when you chewed it. Here's the sickest twist. The most feared punishment didn't harm your body, it erased your existence. Your silks were taken, your name struck from records, and you were reassigned as the lowest servant in the palace, forced to scrub floors beside women who once bowed to you. No one spoke your name again. The stench, so unbearable down there, wasn't just mold and damp stone, it was despair. The air clung to you, so when you emerged, if you emerged, it stayed on your skin for days, marking you as someone who'd been broken. And yes, some never came back at all. The official record would say they were sent to another palace. But everyone knew the truth. The harem had swallowed them whole. But wait. The punishment chambers were only the first layer of the harem's darkness. Beneath the fear, there was something far more chilling. A ritual so cruel, it forced women to choose between their own life and the lives of others. And once you knew about it, you could never sleep without listening for footsteps outside your door. The punishment chambers broke bodies, but the loyalty test broke souls. It wasn't a formal trial. There were no witnesses, no written records. This was a ritual whispered from one frightened concubine to another, always in the kind of hushed tone you'd use to speak of a curse. It could happen at any time. No warning, no reason. One night you'd be asleep in silks. The next you'd be dragged to a chamber lit only by flickering oil lamps, where shadows moved like they were watching you. But wait, it gets worse. This wasn't a test of skill or beauty. It was a test of obedience so twisted, so cruel, that it forced you to prove your loyalty by betraying someone else. a sister in the harem, a friend, sometimes even a lover. The rules were simple, and that's what made it terrifying. The chief eunuch would stand in front of you and give a single command: accuse someone, or take the punishment yourself. There was no third option. If you hesitated, they'd make the choice for you, and you'd suffer twice as hard for the delay. Here's the sickest twist. The accusations didn't have to be true. In fact, the more absurd they were, the more the Valide Sultan seemed to enjoy it. Claim that a rival stole a jewel, and she might get a beating. Accuse her of plotting to poison the Sultan's tea, and she might vanish forever. And every time you spoke, you knew you were tightening a noose around someone's neck just to loosen it around your own. The room was designed for maximum psychological pressure. No windows, no escape. A low ceiling that seemed to press down on you. The oil lamps hissed faintly, and every movement of the eunuchs made the shadows dance on the walls like dark spirits closing in. You could hear your own heartbeat in the silence. The stench, so unbearable, it clung to your clothes, a mix of burning oil, fierce sweat, and the faint iron tang of old blood. It told you this room had seen things no one ever spoke about. Some women refused to speak. Those were the ones everyone remembered because they never came back. But the ones who did speak, they had to live with the knowledge that they'd destroyed another life to save their own. And the cruel genius of the loyalty test was that it made survival taste like guilt. And yes, the harem kept records of every accusation. Not for justice, but for control. If you ever rose too high, became too beloved, too influential, they could drag out your past betrayal and turn every friend into an enemy. The walls of the harem didn't just keep you in, they kept your sins from escaping. But wait, the loyalty test wasn't even the worst fate you could face. There was one more shadow ritual, known only to a handful of women who had the misfortune to survive it, a night where the Sultan himself chose your role in his court and in his bed. The selection was ceremonial, intoxicating, and terrifying because it decided whether you would be favored or discarded. It looked like a celebration. It was really a sentence. On the night of selection, the harem glittered like a dream, lanterns strung like constellations, carpets blooming in crimson and gold, musicians hidden behind carved screens, so the music seemed to float without bodies. But every note, every ribbon, every bowl of sugared fruit had one purpose: to divide the women into the blessed, the useful, and the forgotten. Think this was romance? It was administration wearing perfume. The procession began at dusk. Eunuchs moved in pairs, tapping doors with their staves, calling names in a tone as calm as a verdict. Veils were issued by color pale for those to be displayed and dismissed, deep jewel tones for the candidates, and, rarely, a veil sewn with a thin line of gold thread for the Sultan's shortlist. But wait, it gets worse. A woman could receive the gold-threaded veil and still lose everything by dawn. The veil promised opportunity, not mercy. Attendants traced coal along lash lines until eyes burned. Anklets were tightened to sing with each step. Oils were warmed and massaged into skin until it glowed. The air was a storm of scents: rose, amber, musk layered thick enough to drown a thought. The stench? So unbearable for some that they swayed before they'd even reached the hall, dizzy on beauty's chloroform. Step wrong now, and a life could collapse like a silk pavilion cut at the ropes. The hall itself was geometry for domination. A crescent of low couches for the women, a higher dais for the Valide Sultan, and above her, the shadowed balcony where the Sultan might watch unseen. Mirrors multiplied the scene so that every gesture seemed to have witnesses, even if the witnesses were only your own reflections. Here's the sickest twist. The order of seating was the first test. The second was who noticed it. The third was who pretended not to. The ceremony opened with gifts, not to the Sultan, but to his mother. Ivory combs, filigreed mirrors, brocade fans. Each gift carried a message: I am valuable, I am obedient, I am yours, before I am his. The Valide Sultan spoke little. She didn't have to. A lifted eyebrow could float a woman upward, a sigh could sink her like a stone. And yes, one misplaced compliment to the wrong attendant could undo a year of careful survival. The room remembered everything. Then the catalogue began. Names, origins, languages, skills, and, most importantly, alliances, were murmured by the chief black eunuch, as if he were reading from a sacred ledger. A woman who spoke Persian might be nudged toward the diplomatic pillow talk the empire required this season. A woman with a singer's throat might be positioned where the sultan needed soothing, not fire. What did desire have to do with it? Less than you think. There were 3 layers of trials. The first was choreography. The candidates were led in slow arcs around the hall, bodies turned into calligraphy. Wrists curved, necks elongated, steps measured in half-moons across the carpet. If a veil snagged, if an anklet missed its note, if a woman showed strain where softness was expected, the ledger noticed. But wait, it gets worse. The mirrors were angled, so that flaws appeared twice. Once to the eye, once to the eye's doubt. The second trial was conversation. A screen parted, and a voice asked questions that sounded playful and were anything but. What do you miss from home? Which poet do you prefer? What is the softest sound you've ever heard? The wrong answer wasn't ignorance, it was independence. A woman who loved the wind in the cypress more than court music? Dangerous. A woman who remembered her own name too warmly? Dangerous. Here, the right answer was a lie told beautifully. The third trial was the offering. Trays of figs, pomegranates, pistachios moved like planets through a system of gloved hands until they reached the candidates. The ritual required a small bite taken at a precise moment, a sip of spiced sherbet at another, and the grace to make it seem effortless. Here's the sickest twist. Sometimes a tray was salted instead of sweetened to see who flinched. Sometimes a drink was warmed too hot to see who hid pain behind a smile. The ledger praised women whose throats did not betray them. Above, the balcony murmured. Maybe the Sultan watched. Maybe he sent a favorite to watch for him. It didn't matter. The night of selection made a man's appetite into policy. At intervals, a thin cord was tugged behind the screens, and a eunuch crossed the room to change a candle, shift a cushion, tilt a mirror, tiny edits that meant colossal things. This one, closer. That one, dimmer. The third, brighter, but only when she laughs. Rivals fought without moving. A sidelong gust to snuff a candle, a shared glance that looked like kindness and timed like sabotage. A whispered correction about a silk fold that made a competitor fumble. And yes, women learned to weaponize stillness, to let others exhaust themselves while they became the room's calm center, the eye of a scented storm. When the music softened, the names were read again, shorter this time. Those not called were escorted out with courtesy so polished it cut. They were not dismissed entirely, they were simply rotated to lower orbits. Companion, attendant, teacher to children who might one day wield the empire like a toy. But wait, it gets worse. The women who remained had not won safety. They had won scrutiny. Now came the intimacy pantomime. Behind a gauze screen, a silhouette stepped into view, the Sultan or his stand-in, and the finalists were asked to perform small acts of service. Pour wine without spilling a bead. Cool a cup with a fan timed to the music. Adjust cushions with a gesture that implied care without presumption. It sounds simple. It was surgery on a beating heart. One tremor in the wrist could amputate your future. The Valide Sultan asked for a story. Not a tragedy, not a romance, a parable in which obedience outwitted fate. The best told such things with a smile that knew sorrow and refused to name it. The worst tried to be clever, and here's the sickest twist. Clever was for men. For women, the safest intelligence was disguised as grace. Seals were pressed into wax. Tokens were handed. A silk cord, you will be summoned. A ring, you will be seen. A comb, you will be kept nearby and brushed forward when needed. Or nothing at all, you will learn to be grateful for shadows. A woman holding a cord felt her pulse in the thread as if the future had a texture. Another turned a ring over and over, counting the ways a circle can choke. The room pretended it had chosen. The truth, the room had obeyed. When the lanterns guttered, The ledger closed. The musicians packed silence into their cases. The floor smelled of crushed blossoms and nerves. Servants moved in to gather what the night had shed. Stray pins, a dropped earring, a single pomegranate seed stamped into the carpet like a prophecy. The stench, so unbearable now, was not perfume but the after-sweat of decisions. Sour, human, undeniable. Some women returned to their chambers with new attendants and old enemies. Others returned with nothing and learned the hardest arithmetic. Expectation minus name equals emptiness. A few did not return at all. They were escorted deeper, along corridors that narrowed until the walls brushed silk on both sides, and yes, some doors closed without sound and did not open again. What did the night of selection decide really? Not love, not even desire. It decided where a woman would stand when the next storm hit. Near the Valide Sultan's umbrella, or out where lightning finds the tallest tree. It stamped hierarchy onto skin the way oils do, invisible, indelible, smelling faintly of someone else's will. But wait, there was one variable the ledgers never mastered. The empire didn't run on selection nights. It ran on suns, on swelling bellies and jealous prayers. On herbs steeped too long, on sweets a shade too bitter, on silk cradles and empty cribs. The harem's most horrifying rituals were not performed for music and mirrors. They were performed for heirs. A woman who woke nauseated became a province. Her breath was suddenly taxed, her steps counted. Remedies arrived unasked. So did rival trays. Gifts multiplied like omens. The Valide Sultan's visits became more frequent. Her eyes softer and sharper at once. A single rumor, a boy could turn affection into assassination speed. Who will carry the empire next, and who will not live to see him crawl? The night of selection ended the way all storms do, with a deceptive calm. Lamps snuffed, doors latched, footsteps fading. But the true weather had only begun to turn. Somewhere, a cup cooled, a seed was crushed into paste. A prayer was said with one hand open and one fist closed. And that leads into the ritual. No one dared to name aloud the quiet war of heirs, where lullabies hid poison, midwives kept secrets, and the cost of a cradle could be a life. A harem did not run on love, it ran on lullabies and fear. The instant a concubine missed a cycle, the palace changed temperature around her. Servants leaned closer. Eunuchs counted footsteps. The Valide Sultan's smile grew warmer and sharper. A belly was a province. A heartbeat was policy. The rituals began at dawn. Confinement rooms were scrubbed with rosewater. Charms were stitched into pillows. A brazier burned resin said to protect tiny bones. But wait, it gets worse. Every comfort doubled as surveillance. Midwives chosen by the Valide Sultan recorded everything: appetite, dreams, the color of dawn light in the mother's room, as if fate could be audited line by line. Diet became scripture. Pomegranates for sons, almonds for strong nerves, saffron for luck. Trays arrived unasked, gifts from rivals and allies alike. Here's the sickest twist. The sweetest dates could hide bitter dust. The most fragrant tea could steep a fraction too long. A sip was a vote, a swallow, an oath. Who refused without offending? Who accepted without dying? Astrologers read the sky. Imams murmured blessings. Musicians played patterns meant to calm the womb. And yet the cruelest music was the counting: 1 kick, 2 kicks. Then the terrible silence when even the walls seemed to hold their breath. The stench. So unbearable in those rooms was not decay but panic. Sharp, sour, human. Wet nurses were recruited like generals. Their milk was tested by superstition and schedule, their families vetted, their loyalties purchased twice. A single woman could bind a princeling to health, or unravel him by neglect. And yes, cradles were moved without warning, as if rearranging furniture could outwit destiny. Gifts multiplied with rumor, blue beads against the evil eye, silver rattles that chimed like small prayers. Tiny slippers dyed in the color of victory. But wait. The more the gifts grew, the thinner safety felt. A misplaced ribbon could be a message. A smudge on a swaddle could be a threat. When the child finally cried, a sound like a blade sheathed in silk, the palace erupted, musicians at the gates. Sweet sherbets poured, names whispered like spells. And here's the sickest twist. A healthy boy crowned his mother, and painted a target on her back. Rank soared, enemies multiplied. Night brought the hush no ritual could sweeten. Doors latched twice, lamps lowered. A mother lay awake, one hand on the cradle, the other on a bell. Midwives dozed, sitting up, knives hidden in sewing baskets, prayers tucked beneath their tongues. Somewhere, a tray cooled. Somewhere, a cup steamed. Somewhere, a rival listened for the pause between breaths. Not every cradle stayed full. Fever came like a rumor and left like a raid. A cough, a flush, a stillness. The palace learned to mourn without noise. Carpets swallowed footsteps. Courtyards swallowed tears. Mothers were moved to different rooms so the walls would forget their names. The record said, bad air. The corridor said, bad luck. The heart said nothing at all. But wait. The cradle's victory was only Act 1. The real ritual began when the child grew teeth. Tutors, guards, locked gardens, lessons in silence. And beyond that waited the final ceremony no lullaby could soften. The day a ruler died, and the palace decided who would live to see the next dawn. In the harem, the sultan's last breath was not the end, it was the starting gun. The moment his chest stilled, the air in the palace changed. Servants froze mid-step. Courtiers avoided each other's eyes. Eunuchs moved faster, quieter. The sound of sandals on marble carried more weight than a scream, because everyone knew, before the next sunrise, someone's fate would be sealed forever. The ritual began in the shadows. Doors to the harem were locked from the outside. No one in, no one out. The Valide Sultan took her place in the center hall, dressed not in mourning black, but in deep imperial crimson, a color that spoke of blood, not grief. But wait, it gets worse. The death was never announced right away. Instead, the body lay in a guarded chamber, while the royal astrologer read the omens. In truth, this gave the guards time to secure the heir and remove any rival princes before they could breathe ambition. Here's the sickest twist. Those rivals were usually brothers. The very boys who once played together in the gardens now became each other's executioners. It was tradition and law that only one could rule. The rest were considered a danger to the empire's stability. The solution? A silken cord. Silent, bloodless, final. The harem felt every strangled heartbeat through the floor. Eunuchs passed from chamber to chamber, their faces blank, their hands gloved in white silk. Some concubines clutched their sons to their chests, others hid them in cupboards, behind drapes, anywhere a shadow could shield them. It never worked. The palace knew every corner better than its own history. The stench, so unbearable in those moments, was fear itself heavy, metallic, almost sweet, like overripe fruit left in the sun. Women fainted, children screamed, and yet the music began. Yes, music. Drums rolled, flutes sang, as if to tell the city outside that all was well. Inside, it was the soundtrack to a culling. When the chosen heir emerged, he was dressed in white, a symbol of purity, though his hands sometimes trembled from what they had just done, or from what had been done in his name. The Valide Sultan would take her place beside him, her eyes cold and unreadable, already calculating the next decade of power. And yes, even in victory, safety was an illusion. A boy who became sultan could still fall to poison, a coup, or a whisper in the wrong ear. The harem understood this better than anyone. Power wasn't just won. It had to be guarded like a flame in a storm. But wait, there was one final, secret rite that no chronicler dared write the oath of silence. Survivors of that night swore never to speak of what they saw, not to lovers, not to children, not even in prayer. Because in the harem, memory itself was a dangerous weapon, and forgetting was the only way to live.